He slammed the tarnished, rusted dog collar onto the table, his voice as cold as a poorly stoked fireplace in a villa. Didn't you say having a dog was tiring? Didn't you say it was holding back your painting? Well, now you're finally free of it. Elena clutched the fuzz on the cuff of her sweater, her knuckles white. He had given her this sweater, and it had faded from too many washes, just like the tenderness between them that had long worn thin. She wanted to tell him that when Sophia had pushed her during the argument, all she'd seen was the ghost of her father throwing her cat. She wanted to tell him that when bread had fallen, her hand had brushed its warm fur. But before she could speak, his sneer cut her off. You always do this. Run away and blame everyone else. Rain drifted in from the balcony again, splattering the half-torn couple's painting on the wall. The ink bled like the tears she couldn't hold back. He always called her fragile, but he forgot that half her fragility came from the emotions he'd failed to catch, time and time again. Rain pelted the window panes of the old apartment in the 7th District, rattling like beans being scattered. Elena huddled on the sofa, unconsciously picking at the fuzz on the cuff of her sweater. Leo had given her this off-white sweater, and it had faded to a pale white from too many washes, slumping loosely around her body. Just like her mood right now, the air inside was stale. The cheap wine they'd had for dinner reeked of sourness, mixing with the cloying citrus perfume on Sophia. Leo had always said that scent was overwhelming, like fruit candy smashed on asphalt. Now it clung to Elena's throat, sickeningly sweet. At her feet, a warm ball of fur, Bread, slept soundly, snoring softly. The name had come easily. It was because they'd shared a piece of langos, a traditional Hungarian fried dough, on their first date, back when everything was simple and warm. Outside, the rain grew denser. Elena's gaze drifted to the balcony, once jokingly called their love nest, its walls covered in silly couples' drawings, the windowsill lined with herbs said to repel mosquitoes, and the corner piled with lopsided toys they'd made for bread. Now every item seemed to snicker at her that a screw on the balcony railing had come loose 6 months earlier. Leo had mumbled, "I need to tighten that," while taking a call from London, but the words had floated away and been forgotten. Now that gap, hidden in the rainy night, looked like a crack, quietly gnawing at the sweetness of days gone by. The tablet screen was still on, displaying an email. "Ms. Kovacs, your recent work seems rather somber." Somber? Elena twitched her lips. She was just painting the damp, never-drying spot in her heart. "Sis." Bread pooped on the carpet again. "It stinks." Sophia burst out of the bathroom, slippers slapping the floor, her voice shrill enough to pierce ears. Elena didn't bother moving. It might have an upset stomach. "The bags are in the drawer. Clean it up." "Me again?" Sophia's voice shot up. "I'm your sister, not your maid." The words were like a match, igniting the resentment Elena had bottled up for so long. Memories of her parents' favoritism, Sophia's endless demands, the day she'd endured alone after the breakup, all flooded back, fueled by the wine. Elena stood up sharply. "Enough. This isn't a junkyard." "Oh, it's not a shelter? Then why are you pretending to let me stay? To show off how much better you have it? A man who gives you sweaters, a dog to play the loving owner with." Sophia stepped closer, her perfume choking Elena. Bread woke up, whimpering anxiously as it squeezed between them. In the scuffle, someone lost their balance. Elena felt her elbow slam hard into the doorframe. The pain made her let go. A golden blur darted from her arms toward the balcony. Time suddenly stretched. Elena smelled the stench of rain mixed with the sickly sweet perfume, and heard Bread's short, sharp yelp. That sound, sharp as an icicle, pierced straight into the depths of her eardrums, overlapping with a long-buried noise in her memory. Her fingers grasped at thin air, catching only a few wet, warm strands of fur. A dull thud came from below. It was almost inaudible, yet heavy enough to shatter every bone in her body. Sophia's face turned deathly pale. She stepped back as if seeing a ghost, then spun around, crashing through the door and fleeing into the hallway. Her footsteps frantic, Elena froze. Rain poured in through the open balcony door, drenching her face in sweater, sending chills down her spine. But the faint warmth of Bread's saliva still lingered in her palm. She inched toward the balcony and looked down, her eyes stinging from the rain. The familiar golden bundle lay motionless on the cold, wet ground below. She sprained her ankle running downstairs, but felt no pain. Cold rain streamed down her face as she dropped to her knees beside the small body, her fingers trembling violently. She reached out. Bread was still warm. Its golden fur was matted with rain, clinging to its skin. It had been licking her palm just moments ago. Mrs. Esther hurried over with an umbrella. Good heavens! Elena, what happened? Elena looked up, rain dripping from her hair and her eyes. Her voice was broken, barely coherent. It was just licking me. I had it. I swear I did. She clutched the soaked sweater to her chest, her knuckles white. Just like when I was a kid with that cat. I didn't hold on again. I never hold on. In that moment, she wasn't a 28-year-old illustrator. She was an 8-year-old girl again, huddled in a dark wardrobe, clamping a hand over her mouth. She could hear her father shouting, her mother's sobs, and her beloved cat's final, shrill cry, followed by a dull thud outside the window. Pets were just things you raised to lose. Love was just something you waited to get hurt by. It seemed like a truth etched into her bones from birth. Leo Vance returned to Budapest 3 days later. The air already carried the chill of early winter. He was in town for an architecture exhibition. When the plane landed, he'd looked out the window to see the Danube River, a gray-blue ribbon, meandering lazily through the city. He still smelled of London's fog and cedar cologne. Clara's secretary had suggested he switch to it, saying it suited the air to the Vance name. The citrus-scented cologne Elena had once loved, the one that smelled like sunlight, had long been discarded somewhere. The overcoat he wore was still the one Elena had bought him, its collar slightly frayed. Yes, soon as the exhibition ended, Marcus called. His voice was as cold as ice. Leo, bad news. Elena's dog, Bread, fell off the balcony. It didn't survive. Leo's heart dropped. When did this happen? 3 days ago. They're calling it an accident. Marcus paused. But there's some talk online. Do you want me to handle it? Leo gripped his phone, his knuckles white. He thought back to their explosive breakup 6 months earlier. Elena had huddled on the sofa with Bread, tears streaming down her face, her voice tired and hoarse. I can't take this anymore. Work, and now this. I'm failing at everything. Back then, he'd been swamped with the London project and his mother's urgent calls. He dismissed her words as just another one of her moods, muttering, "Don't overthink it," and forgetting even to hug her. Could she have really seen Bread as a burden? The thought slithered into his mind like a venomous snake. He rushed to the old apartment building and stood in the cold wind for half an hour. His overcoat was soaked through, but he felt no cold. He clutched something tightly in his hand. Bread's collar, its metal clasp rusted. They'd picked it out together at a street-side shop. Marcus had dug it up somewhere and given it to him. Inside the apartment, Elena was packing up Bread's things. She placed them into the cardboard box, moving as slowly as a wind-up doll with no wind-up key. Every time she picked one up, she mumbled to the air, "I'm sorry I didn't watch you." By mistake, she poured half a bag of dog food into the box, too. She fumbled to scoop it out, repeating the process several times, her eyes empty and hollow. She still wore that old sweater, shrinking into it like a leaf ready to fall. Leo felt something twist in his chest, but that terrible suspicion, mixed with days of exhaustion and worry, surfaced, smothering his sympathy. He looked at her numb expression, and her breakup cries of, "I'm overwhelmed," echoed in his ears. Anger, mixed with the pain of feeling betrayed, burned through his reason. He strode over and slammed the rusted collar onto the table. "Didn't you say having a dog was tiring? Didn't you say it held back your painting?" His voice was as cold as the perpetually underlit fireplace in his London villa. "Well, now you're finally free, aren't you?" Elena looked up sharply, her face drained of all color. Her lips trembled, her eyes glistening with tears she forced to hold back. She wanted to explain about Sophia, about that damn loose railing, about the old fear of her father and the cat that had surged up in her bones, but the aftertaste of wine and the shock of the tragedy felt like a cold hand around her throat. Her words shattered in her throat, leaving only broken sobs. And no, Leo, when Sophia pushed me, I thought of Dad. Leo cut her off, a sneer tugging at his lips. He completely misunderstood. Elena, you always do this. Run away. Now you're even trying to destroy the last of our memories, aren't you? The door slammed shut with a deafening crash. The whole room shook, and the couple's painting on the wall trembled 3 times. Elena collapsed to the floor, tears finally pouring down. She stared at the cold collar on the table, as if facing a death sentence again. Outside the window, Budapest sky was a gray that choked the breath. Mrs. Esther, worried, used her connections at the community senior center to find Dr. Ivan Novak's psychotherapy clinic. The clinic was warmly decorated with soft yellow walls, plush sofas, and a few potted plants in the corner. Only the small succulent on the windowsill looked lifeless, its leaves wilted and crinkled. Yet it held a stubborn, unyielding air. Elena huddled on the sofa, twisting the hem of her dress, afraid to meet Eva's eyes. They were too clear, too piercing. She bit the end of her pencil, a habit. Its wood was covered in tiny tooth marks. Ms. Kovacs, would you like to talk about what happened that night? Eva's voice was gentle, with a calm, reassuring tone unique to professionals. Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She bent down, pulled a sketchbook from her canvas bag. The hardcover was a birthday gift from Leo, and flipped through it. It was filled with drawings of bread being silly, and sketches of Leo's profile as he focused on his blueprints. But several pages in the middle had been torn out, leaving ragged edges like an ugly scar. She'd torn them in a fit of rage during their breakup 6 months earlier. Her hands shaking, she turned to a blank page and grabbed her pencil. Her lines were messy and urgent. Rainy night, balcony, a little girl hiding in a wardrobe, a man's furious figure, and a terrified cat visible through the wardrobe crack. As she drew, tears splattered onto the paper, blurring the pencil lines. I couldn't look at Bread's body, she finally said, her voice as rough as sandpaper. Just like I couldn't look at Adam's funeral. The moment the name slipped out, Eva's hand, mid-note-taking, paused almost imperceptibly. She looked up at Elena, and a flicker of unexpected pain crossed her eyes, which usually held a professional distance. Even the wilted succulent on the windowsill seemed to cry out silently. Eva took a deep breath, struggling to stay calm. Why couldn't you look? Because if I did, it would be real. Like when he threw my cat to its death. I hid in the wardrobe. If I didn't go out, if I didn't look, I could pretend it was still alive. Elena's shoulders began to shake. Leo says I did it on purpose, but I didn't. I had it. I held on to it. She repeated the words over and over, as if convincing herself or arguing with an invisible judge. Eva fell silent. The clinic was so quiet, they could hear the faint rustle of wind outside. She stood up and walked to the window, her fingers brushing the succulent's withered leaves. Elena, she said, her back to her. Her voice had lost some of its professional detachment, revealing a raw weariness. You know, there are things we think we can keep intact forever. If we just don't look at them, don't touch them. But they're just wilting quietly somewhere else. She turned around, her eyes glistening with the same wetness as Elena's, though she forced it back. Next time, let's talk about your father and that cat, okay? Elena nodded in a daze. As she left, she glanced back. Eva was carefully watering the succulent with a small spray bottle. In that gesture, Elena saw a sorrow she knew all too well, the desire to make amends for something lost. Luka Petrovich's Black Bean House animal shelter was just as it always was, chaotic yet warm. Dog barks filled the air, mixing with the sense of disinfectant, dog food, and animal fur. But Luka's heart was heavy. The news of Bread's death weighed on him like a boulder. He'd rescued the dog from a slaughterhouse 3 years earlier. Its hind legs had been broken, and its eyes were filled with terror. Then Elena and Leo had come. So gentle, promising to give a home. Luka still remembered how Leo had knelt down to carefully apply ointment to Bread's legs that he refused to believe Elena would hurt Bread on purpose. A hunch urged him to visit the old apartment again. The scene had long been cleaned up, But Luca's eyes scanned the balcony like searchlights. With his experience fixing broken cages and fences, he spotted the unnatural looseness of the balcony railing at a glance. He found an excuse to go upstairs, and with Elena's shaky permission, examined the railing closely. The screw was so loose, it could be twisted off by hand. He knelt down and found a half-rusted screw of the same size in the corner. Left there, unnoticed, it seemed. A vague memory surfaced. About 6 months earlier, he'd run into Leo at a hardware store. Leo had been holding a box of screws, just like this one, and had mentioned in passing, the balcony railing at my apartment has a small problem. The clues, once scattered, began to form a clear thread. Sophia, meanwhile, was having a miserable time. She'd hidden in her tiny rental apartment, and every night, the memory of the argument, the scuffle, and Bread's falling cry replayed in her mind. She bought Elena's favorite cherries, and several times had lingered outside her sister's studio, only to lose her nerve and leave. The bright red cherries in her pocket were almost crushed, their cold juice soaking her palm, like the unrelenting guilt in her heart. Luca found her, not at Elena's apartment, but in the alley behind the cafe where she worked. Sophia was hiding by a trash can, smoking, her fingers trembling violently. Luca didn't beat around the bush. He pulled out the rusted screw and the photos he'd taken of the railing. Miss Sophia, was Bread's death really an accident? His voice was quiet, but carried an unshakable weight. I know you were there that night. Sophia stared at the clear signs of looseness in the photos, at the rusted screw. Her face turned pale inch by inch. The cigarette fell from her fingers. From the shelter came the anxious bark of a dog, like a drumbeat tapping her conscience. She thought of the trembling puppy she'd seen cowering in the shelter's corner, and how it looked just like her. As a child, afraid of being punished for doing wrong. Her selfishness, her jealousy, her habit of picking fights to feel seen, all seemed ridiculous and pitiful now. She covered her face, her shoulders slumping, and sobbed. I didn't mean to. I swear. I fought with Sis and pushed her. She hit the balcony, and the dog just, finally, the truth came out. Luca patted her shoulder silently and handed her a tissue. The girl who was always so sharp-tongued now cried like a lost child that a few days later, Elena noticed the loose balcony railing had been fixed. The screws were tightened firmly, and beside it sat a small pot of fresh geraniums. Under the pot was a note, written in Sophia's messy handwriting. Sis, I'm sorry. I left cherries by the door. They're sweet. Elena stared at the geraniums, still standing tall in the early winter breeze, then at the bag of bright red cherries by the door. She paused for a long time. Finally, she picked up a cherry and put it in her mouth. It was sweet, but beneath the sweetness was a faint tartness. The hard pit pressed against her tongue, like the unresolved knots between her and her sister. But she didn't throw away the bag of cherries. Encouraged by Dr. Eva, Elena copied the part of her medical records that documented her anxiety symptoms after a therapy session and asked Luca to pass it to Marcus. This proof, combined with Luca's evidence, photos of the railing, the rusted screw, a recording of Sophia's confession, finally let the truth flow like the Danube, slowly but unstoppably washing away the mud of misunderstanding. Marcus Wright, a lawyer known for his rigid rationality, fell into an unusual silence after receiving the materials. He sat in his large, cold office at a top London law firm, flipping through the medical records. A small, folded drawing slipped out. It was in Elena's style. A sketch of Leo in a temporary construction site office, bent over his blueprints by dim yellow light, his brows furrowed in a focused, almost endearing way. On the back of the paper was a small note. He said when this project ends, he'll design a house with a big balcony for Bread to run around in. Marcus thought of his own childhood in the slums, of his mother working 3 jobs to put him through school, tired, but with bright eyes, and of the lines he'd blurred in his rush to climb up. For the first time, he realized that the rationality he'd prided himself on was, at times, just a polished form of indifference. He picked up the phone and called Leo, his voice still tight, but with a faint, unnoticeable warmth. Leo, you need to see something. Don't let prejudice blind you. Leo was in his mother's London villa when he received the encrypted file from Marcus. The living room was large enough to ride a horse in, and the fire in the fireplace was barely alive. Lady Clara sat across from him, wearing an expensive pearl suit, and was forcefully suggesting he consider marrying the daughter of a business associate. The pearls reflected cold light, stinging his eyes that he opened the file. Elena's medical records were terrifyingly detailed. Those little moods he dismissed had piled up into a heavy, painful burden. The close-up photos of the railing, the rusted screw, they pierced his heart like needles. He remembered the promises he'd forgotten, the nights Elena had waited for him on the sofa with bread, the anxiety she tried to hide. Guilt flooded over him like a tide. Ignoring his mother's displeased glare, he booked the earliest flight back to Budapest. Instead of going straight to Elena, he detoured to Mrs. Esther's house. The old woman said nothing. She just pulled out her phone and opened her photo album. It was filled with hundreds of pictures. Elena gently brushing Bread's fur, fumbling to give it medicine, staying up late to sew lopsided toys, holding it by the window to watch the rain. In every photo, Elena's eyes when she looked at Bread were soft enough to melt water. "Love isn't just words," Mrs. Esther said gently. Her gray hair was tied back with an old blue ribbon, a gift from her late husband. "It's built little by little with everyday things. That's how I took care of my husband in his last days." Leo gripped the old collar in his pocket. The cold metal now seemed to carry the warmth of his fingertips. He went to the Pets and Memories Memorial Exhibition, organized by Elena, with Luca's help. The space was small but warm. The walls were covered in Elena's drawings of Bread, from its wobbly first steps to its mischievous antics, each one vivid. On the long table in the middle were photos and stories of other people's pets, their edges worn soft by tears or time. The air smelled of freshly baked Lango's cookies, warm and buttery. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, gilding Elena in a soft glow. She was wearing a clean dress and speaking quietly to a visitor, her profile calm and gentle. Leo walked over, holding the printed photos Mrs. Esther had given him. "Elena," he called softly. Elena turned around. When she saw him, her eyes flickered with complex emotions, but she didn't look away. "I'm sorry," Leo said, his throat dry. "I always thought if I worked hard, made more money, I could give you a stable future. But I never asked what you really wanted, what you were afraid of." He glanced at the largest painting of Bread on the wall. Its eyes were pure, as if they could see into the soul. Elena followed his gaze. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "I should have told you earlier. I wasn't afraid of having a dog or of taking responsibility. I was afraid that I'd end up like I did with Dad, powerless to stop it, losing everything I cared about. Even afraid I'd become like him, letting my anger hurt people." The ice between them began to melt in their honest gaze. Leo almost reached out, wanting to tuck the strand of hair falling over her forehead behind her ear. Just then, his phone rang, shrilly, like a death knell. It was the London hospital. His mother, Clara, had suffered a sudden cerebral hemorrhage. Her condition was critical. The company was in chaos, and they were urging him to return immediately to take control. The voice on the other end was cold and urgent, like a hammer, smashing the fragile warmth that had just begun to grow at the airport. Budapest's rare spring sunlight was surprisingly harsh. Leo held Elena's hand, his fingertips cold. "Wait for me. 3 months, no, maybe 6. Once I sort out Mom's things and the company, I'll come back. Let's start over. Get another dog or a cat, whatever you want." Elena looked into his anxious, sincere eyes. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Okay, take care of her." Leo hugged her tightly, then turned and strode toward security, his back resolute, as if he was afraid he'd change his mind if he looked back. Elena stood there, watching until his figure disappeared at the end of the corridor. Then she lifted her hand and waved gently toward the empty space. "Leo," she whispered to the air, her voice so soft only she could hear. "I'll wait, but I also need to learn to live well, even if I don't." She knew the distance between London, A bustling, cold city with its family burdens, and her small Budapest apartment, filled with memories, was more than just geography. There, he faced a family business he'd have to fight to fix, a mother who might still be domineering even in illness, responsibilities he couldn't easily cast aside, and between them, a heavy past that would take time and effort to truly mend. When she returned to her illustration studio, the sun was already setting. The unfinished painting of the house with a balcony stood alone on the easel. Elena picked up her brush and dipped it in paint, but she paused in front of the canvas for a long time. In the end, she didn't continue the house. Instead, she laid out a new sheet of paper and slowly painted another scene. Leo, wearing the overcoat she'd given him, standing on a gray London street corner. Looking back, his eyes were complex, as if he was gazing at her across 1,000 mountains and rivers. The background was London's cold, modern skyscrapers, contrasting sharply with the warm rooftops of Budapest's old town behind him. As she painted, a warm drop fell from the corner of her eye, landing right on the painted London fog. It spread into a dark, wet spot, like a tear she couldn't hold back, like the final raindrop, announcing a weight filled with uncertainty. Outside the window, spring had finally arrived in Budapest. The sunlight was bright enough to dazzle, and the Danube glistened with ripples. But inside that small studio, some things seemed to stay forever trapped in the cold of that rainy night.